amazing. I was mesmerized by everything she said. I think she
Mm.
felt the same. We just
Yeah.
connected so well. She thinks how I think. She believes in what I believe. She believes in healing and expanding and growing
Mm.
and being more for what you've experienced, not less, and how to move into that. So I'm going to let Lisa take it away.
Thank you. Just a little intro about myself, or where would you
Yes,
like me to begin?
please.
Yeah. Well, hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining, those of you who are joining live, and if you're watching the recording later. And ditto to everything Susan said. We hadn't met, we got on screen and to record, and it was like we'd known each other for a long time. So I so appreciate being invited into your community. I call myself a grief activist now, which is, I always joke, not something I dreamed of doing when I was a little girl. That was not on my bucket to-do list career. But as life happens, as Susan said, grief is actually a part of life because loss is a part of life. Being human is a terminal condition. And I don't think I quite really understood that until much later in my life. I have got my MSW. I got to unmute myself there in case anybody missed that. I think when you muted
Oh,
everybody, no, that's okay. I just
okay,
want to make sure.
sorry.
No, no, no.
Go
I saw
ahead.
it. I saw it go.
All
So I'm
right,
I'm back.
good.
Anyhow, well, I'm showing up today sort of as Susan indicated, personally and professionally. So I've worked in all kinds of settings over the course of 20 something years as a social worker. I worked in foster care and adoption, family services, crisis intervention, which you can understand that those are areas where people are experiencing a profound amount of grief. But it wasn't until at the age of 40, after a year of my husband becoming unrecognizable, and we went from doctor to doctor asking for answers, which they didn't have any. We found out 2.5 weeks before he died in my arms that he had a grapefruit-sized brain tumor, and and that was, needless to say, devastating. So at the age of 40, I was now a solo parent to our daughter who was 7, and was asked to come back to work as clinical director of my nonprofit 2 weeks after my husband died, which I did. And it wasn't really until I got back to work, both because of my own experience with people and how they did and didn't show up for me, but also it really offered me a new lens into all the grief that I'd missed among all the clients that I'd served over my career. Because even in my MSW program, what I realized was even in the helping community, we've gotten grief very wrong. And though I did some other work, starting at a different nonprofit and doing other work, I really had this calling that I became a speaker. I was a writer for a lot of the work that I did. Starting a nonprofit, you have to sort of be public facing and do all that work. And it came to me in 2019 like a download, much to the chagrin of everybody else in my life, because I said, I have to quit my job and create a company about grief. That's what I'm meant to be doing. And I did it within like 2 weeks. And that sort of born the podcast, the book, the TED Talk, all the work that I do. But the thing I want to, I'm sure, Susan, we're going to dive into it today, but I think the thing that I really grappled with early on when I was asked to return to work was just how fundamentally grief illiterate our culture is. We've glommed onto a singular story of grief, one that fits very well the productivity obsessed destinations over journeys, kind of pull yourself up by your bootstraps myth that we have in this country. We glommed on to the 5 stages of grief, which is not a thing. We've glommed on to all of that, that grief only comes from death loss, as you alluded to. Actually, I would imagine most of us are grieving lots of different losses, even as we speak in the world right now. So my training was in narrative therapy. I forgot to mention. And so, how we talk about things, I recognize is extremely important. The words we use, the words we speak, actually either open doors or close them. They allow us to see the world in a way or not. And I just started looking around and listening around to all the really limited and false and harmful stories that were being told about grief. And so, my mission is to just change the narratives of grief one conversation at a time. That's sort of my tagline for myself. So that's a little bit about my history. I want to pause, Susan, because blah, blah, blah. We don't need to go into the details of my story, but yeah.
I actually want to.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Yeah.
let me
Yeah.
keep going. Lisa's the host of an amazing podcast called Grief is a Sneaky Bitch. So she doesn't just have a book, but she hosts that.
Yeah.
And an adjunct, she's a professor at University of Texas and a sought after speaker. She does TEDx
Yeah.
guys, which is huge. In 2023, before beginning treatment for triple positive breast cancer, she
Yeah.
delivered her viral TEDx talk, Why Knowing More About Grief Can Make It Suck Less.
Yeah.
And that was a big thing.
Yeah.
Um, Her book, it's bold, compassionate. And I wrote this out and I want to read it because I think
Yeah.
it's important. It's bold, compassionate. It's a guide. It dismantles the myths about grief. She combines her personal story, her clinical insights, her cultural critique. She invites readers to reimagine grief as a sacred and complex emotional experience. She's infused with clarity, wisdom, and even humor. It's available at all major online bookstores, local independent bookstores. So, Lisa, we're going to open this
Yeah.
topic talking about dispelling the myths of grief
Yeah.
and how those myths actually cause harm.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, oh, sorry. Did you have a specific question or dive in? Yeah. Well,
Dive in.
I think that's part of what I'm trying to unravel for all of us. And by the way, they always say like research is me search. The reason I stumbled upon this is I wanted to figure out, what is really the story and where are the myths. I think sort of at a zoomed out level, what I think about these harmful stories, which I'll dive into some of the myths that are some of the most critical myths, is that there's the lived experience that we all have in grief. And then there's the stories culture has told us, which includes, by the way, parents, media, all the things, and we then tell ourselves. And the gap between what we think grief should or shouldn't look like and the actual lived experience of grief causes us to suffer unnecessarily. We become self critical, self judgmental, isolated. Other people don't know how to show up for us because, by the way, they also have this story, of grief. And so that gap is really what I'm trying to close. One of the things that I think comes to mind when I think about some of the myths that are most harmful, there's so many. We could do an hour just on that. But one of them is that grief is just emotions and that the emotion of grief is really just sad. But when we think about the impact of grief, we really need to be understanding that it impacts our emotional, physical, cognitive, relational, and spiritual well being. And so that's a very different story in terms of how we might show up for ourselves, how workplaces or family members might show up for us if they understood that. And that's again, so then we wonder, why are we sick all the time? Why are we aching? Why can't we sleep? Do we have brain fog? Well, if we just had the story that grief is just feeling sad for a while and then you get over it, then we wouldn't be able to thread that through line to understand brain fog, which we call grief brain, is very real. Researcher Mary Frances O'Connor has written an entire fantastic book about that. Same with our physical body, right? So I think the notion that it's just sad and that it's just emotional is one of the most harmful myths. I saw you nodding earlier when I said I think the 5 stages is also a really harmful myth. Of course, our culture glommed onto it because we love everything that's a top 10 list and 5 steps to list. But maybe many of you might know this already, that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who came up with the 5 stages, came up with that to describe how dying people come to terms with their own dying process. This is not about how we grieve other people. Again, when you think about that gap between the story we tell and the lived experience, that story says you're going to be numb, then you're going to be angry, whatever, and then you get to acceptance and voila. That story is that you move on from grief. And I argue that you move forward with grief. You learn how to carry the weight of grief. And while grief in the beginning, if you can see me, is this and this is your life, grief doesn't shrink. Your life just expands around your grief. You have more experiences, more love, more creativity, and you learn how to carry the weight of it. So there are many others, but I think those are probably the most critical in terms of the unnecessary suffering we experience. And by the way, it doesn't just impact the griever, it also makes the grief supporters suffer too, because they've now bought into this myth that they should be over it by now, that I don't want to mention their name and it will make them upset, that they must be crazy because they can't remember how to do things anymore. And also because we will be grief supporters and grievers sometimes at the same time in our lives, but certainly if you live any amount of time, everyone on this call will be a griever and a grief supporter or already has been. So we suffer so much. And that's, I think I was alluding to the sort of cultural critique that I'm getting into, is that, we learn what grief should and shouldn't be. I talk a lot in the book about becoming a should detective, and that we should all over ourselves, and that can be really harmful. And those stories of should come from kind of the broader culture in which we inhabit. And this neat, tidy story of grief that asks us to move forward fits really neatly and I'm not like bashing capitalism, but it fits really neatly in a system that asks us to be productive, get back to work, keep the machinery going. Grief is actually messy and nonlinear. And and when I say we, I mean me too, like we in the West have a story that there's sort of a way to do something neat and tidy, and then it's always forever progressing, in an incline towards infinite amazingness. And again, those are all the themes. Those are some of the major themes that I think then we suffer, because we mark ourselves or judge ourselves against that ruler. And if we do, we're going to feel like a failure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like they want us to wrap it up with a
Yeah.
bow
Yeah.
and set it aside like a little present waiting, right?
Yeah.
Actually, Greece in the corner doing push-ups waiting for us.
Yes,
And it
exactly.
comes on years and years and years later. It's never gone. It is joining
No.
into the landscape of our journey.
Yes.
And, as you were sharing, and that is the power of grief.
Yeah.
And we are not in charge of it. And I
No.
think that I agree with you with the book. I love
Yeah.
Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. I know why she wrote it
Yeah.
also.
Yeah.
But I really feel that when we take those quote stages,
Yeah.
they can start a process for us of understanding, like, why am I so angry? That
Yeah.
has an answer for
Yeah.
that. Why are you so angry? It can help you, give you a little pieces and a little bit of guidance, but overall, over the landscape of this, it is not you're
Yeah.
bouncing from this to this and back to this and over this and under that, and then you start healing and surrender and it's all over.
No. Yeah.
Never over.
Yeah.
It's never gone. And for those of you that now have grief or have been grieving for years and years and years, I know you're keenly aware of that.
Yeah.
And
It metabolizes, it changes our relation. I like to think of us being in relationship with our grief, which
yeah,
is one way to say we're in relationship if it's a death loss with our person too. So it will
mhm,
change over time, but it will not disappear. And those waves that come will come, but they'll be shorter and sharper, right? But we won't be in the sea of it. Even Elizabeth Kubler-Ross did not claim that to be. She sort of dispelled the myth. I think again, it's the kind of the cultural. It just seemed too nice and easy for the culture to be like, oh, so we can be in
cleaning it up.
denial, and then we can be in anger, and then we get to acceptance,
Yeah.
and ta-da,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that,
They were trying to clean it up and make it
yeah,
look easy and not messy. And, as you said, grief is extremely messy. And
yeah,
sometimes we don't even know, your body has memories.
yeah,
And, years can go by and all of a sudden, you're sick and you're acting crazy. And I know for me,
yeah,
I can get really crazy. I can get really irritable and I can get depressed and I want to sit around and I'm tired and exhausted and I have no reason why. And I'll look at the calendar and go, oh, there we are. It's a
yeah,
week out or it's, and I find for myself, I don't know about you, Lisa, but I find for myself, it's usually a couple weeks out that it starts. And then
yeah,
when the day comes, I'm fine. It's the
yeah,
strangest thing, but my body has memory of that loss, of that trauma. This is trauma.
yeah,
And trauma doesn't leave us. It changes shape, it changes color,
yeah,
and then joins into the landscape of our journey. So I
yeah,
love everything you're saying because it's like
yeah.
leave.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, our bodies have an internal calendar, just to sort of wrap up what you were saying. And so we
Mhm.
know, when it's the season of the anniversary or whatever. And again, that's important to know, because then we have learned that grief impacts your body too. So now that we have that truth instead of the other truth that it's just feelings, then we can not feel crazy the fact that we feel down or exhausted or we're crying again or missing our person. It's because our body is holding on to that, and it just needs to be tended to, and it will pass, but we have to tend to it. And so there's that internal calendar that is, we know, our body knows. Yeah.
Body, mind, spirit. Grief
Yep.
hits all three areas.
Yeah.
And so it's going to affect all three areas. And
Yeah.
I think that what we've learned is that if we just do it right, we won't grieve anymore. If we
Yeah.
just do it right, we'll be normal in our grief, which I don't even know what that word means
Yeah.
anymore. If we just do it right, we won't suffer longer than we need to. And one of the things I hear all the time is, gosh, it's been 10 years. What's wrong? Like,
Yeah.
when is she ever going to get over this? Never.
Yeah.
It's just that it's going to expand, it's
Yeah.
going to change, it's going to shift. It's got different masks,
Hmm.
and for all of us that have been in this process of grieving, which I know everyone here has, and as some of you are in it right now,
Yeah.
meaning you're in the middle of going through something. It could be anticipatory grief, it could be that it just occurred.
Yeah.
um, there's different, it's like a cycle for me. I know
Yeah.
there's different energies that come out of me at different times, no matter how many years has gone by, but especially in the beginning. I'm in a complete quandary. Like,
Yeah.
what just happened? I feel like a train ran me over when I
Yeah.
deal in the beginning of grief. It's like I've been hit by a train. I'm not going to be thinking clearly. I'm not going to spiritually be fit for sure. And what
No.
is that? What is
Yeah.
spiritual fitness? And I'd love for you to tap on into
Yeah.
that, because I think that that's used way too much. If you're spiritually fit, you understand that
It's
they're
a
with the spirit world or
it's
whatever
a
they.
it's a bypass. I think it can be used as a weapon. It can be used as a bypass,
Mhm.
and to your point, I just wanted to add before I talk about sort of how we think about spirituality and our loss, although of course I defer to you mostly, but is one of the reasons that grief shows up again and again over the course of our life. It kind of bubbles up again, even if the loss has happened. I mean, it'll be 14 years this summer when my husband died, and you better believe I still have waves of missing him. Although I try to talk to him now, most days. Um, is new losses bring on old losses. So whenever we now experience maybe a new death of somebody we love, or maybe the loss of a dream or the loss of a relationship, it can push on that place in us where we have felt that loss. And doesn't mean we're going to start back at the beginning with that initial loss. It just is a way we can just honor that, oh, it's pushing on that part of us, that part of our body, our mind, our spirit that remembers what it's like. And so just to normalize, again, that's kind of what I'm trying to do throughout my work, is just to normalize all of these experiences, because we've made grief problematic, when actually grief is the most natural thing that we do as a mammal, because the other mammals in our mammal family do grieve as well, and have
Oh,
mourning
we're born for it.
practices as well. Yeah, I think the spiritual path is really interesting for each person in grief, and having been raised not a religious, which religion and spirituality are not the same, obviously, but I think often what happens for me, one of the things that came up is this notion that, as we alluded to, that sometimes, not always, and rarely with intention, whenever I'm criticizing a grief supporter, by the way, I want you to know, I recognize most of the time it's coming from, there's no malice. But they do say hurtful things. Like when I was in the hospital and everybody got to come say goodbye before I had to take my 40-year-old husband off life support and then go home and tell my 7-year-old that her father was dead, his friend said to me, "Don't worry, Lisa, he's going to be in a better place soon." Now, do I think he meant malice? No, I think he was a religious person. I also think he was looking at a man who was his exact same age and freaking out. And so he had to have a story that he was constructing, that it's okay that this happened because he's going to be in a better place. Right. And so that's for me how I've experienced a lot of the bypassing. Now, if that is meaningful to you, that's important. And I always tell grief supporters, it's not about what makes you feel better. If that person is religious, then speak to them in your religious beliefs. If that person's not religious, then don't bring your beliefs onto them, right? So
Well, I
I
think
think,
people do that for a reason, and I
I-
think it's that they're uncomfortable
no,
with your just
exactly.
uncomfortable,
Well, it's very
feelings.
othering. So much of what
Yeah.
grief supporters often say, when they start any sentence with the words at least, which just makes me want to scream, right? Or any kind of comparison. It again, comes to the fact that most of us we are living in this grief illiterate culture. Most of us were not taught how to be with our emotions, how to be with our own grief. So when we see somebody else being with their grief and it's very intense, we feel overwhelmed. And so when we try to sort of assuage them, but really what we're trying to do is assuage our own pain and our own discomfort. But what we do as a result is we do not make the griever feel better. We just make the griever feel more misunderstood, more alone, more isolated. And that's again why a lot of my work, and you saw in the book, I'm sort of speaking both to grievers and grief supporters in all of the work that I do, because I think that can be a problem. And to me, the spirituality aspect, I remind people, is whether you were raised in a religion, whether you ever step foot in a mosque or a temple or a church or anything, I've never met somebody who's experienced a profound loss that didn't have some kind of at least existential crisis, right? Why do bad things happen to good people, in other words? And that's something, again, I think we're ill equipped to handle as friends, as families, as a culture. And one of the pieces of our journey is to kind of grapple with that, but not again in this bypassing everything happens for a reason BS, but in a you know, something happened and now what? I'd like to pull those two things apart. It's like everything happens, period. Now what do I want to do with my life? Because that fact is a fact. It's not I'm making meaning out of the death. It's about how am I making find meaning in life if I'm still here. And to me, that's kind of the spiritual work. I feel like I'm being down on spirituality here. I just notice in my work a lot the way it can be weaponized against grievers. And so I really invite people to just be with the mystery of this existential crisis and actually to invite it in a way as an opportunity. It feels really scary and it feels really painful, but it also can be an opportunity to figure out what do I believe and how do I want to enact those rituals of mourning or those practices that allow me to feel seen in my own grief, you know?
Yeah, I know for me, when people come to me, one of the questions they ask me, was this in their contract?
Yeah. Yeah.
And, I believe some contracts are set to leave early, but do I
Yeah.
believe that committing an act of suicide would be in their contract? No. So
Yeah.
I think we're trying to make sense of it. Now,
Yeah.
the problem is what I've learned to do in the spiritual sector,
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
course, which is different than
Yeah.
what we're having right now, is I've learned to follow the lead of the person.
Yeah.
So if they say to me, it's really important for me to know that this person didn't just leave for nothing,
Yeah.
that there's more to this picture, then I'll share with them what I know is more to the picture.
Yeah.
Or if they come to me and say, I need to know that they didn't plan this,
Yeah.
they didn't have anything to do with this, we talk about that and what that
Yeah.
looks like. So I'm leaning into truth either way, but I'm handling it in a way that speaks of it differently,
Yeah.
speaking the same truth and with a different voice, basically.
Well, and also I think you're following a really beautiful principle of grief support, or how I think about it, which is letting the griever take the lead. We're there to hold space and bear witness for the griever. That's our job, to affirm and to make them feel less alone, to remind them that they belong to the human community, even though they don't even recognize themselves anymore, and they maybe don't feel human. And so we take their lead, right? If they want to talk about their person, let's talk about their person. If they don't want to talk about their person, then we don't need to talk about their person, right? So that principle that you're talking about, I think, is really an important reminder, including the fact that I guess this was a myth that I didn't bring up, but since we're talking about grief support, it is not our job to fix the griever, because grief is not a sign that you're broken.
Thank you. Thank you for
It is
saying.
not a sign that you're broken. And one of the mistakes that we make, and the reason many people don't show up at all, or they show up and say the at least, or the everything happens is because they believe it's their job to fix the griever and they don't know how. So then they have to, but that's not our job. We
No,
should be broken. We are
not
broken
even the
open.
healers, by the
No,
way.
no, we're broken open. Really, the most healing things. And I think if all of you think about the people in your life who showed up for you in your loss, the ones who are able to sit with me in the discomfort. They didn't say any grand, they didn't recite poetry, they didn't say any grand solutions. When I was sitting on the couch and crying, they sat right next to me. When I couldn't even make it to the couch and I slid to the floor, they slid down onto the floor with me, right? They brought up Eric's name, they asked me to share stories. They weren't trying to fix me. It's really subtle. It's really quiet. It's not big and fix and tools and skills. It's really quiet. And that's hard for us because most of us haven't learned how to even be with our own pain. So people don't like to hear this, but when they say, how can I be a really good grief supporter to my sister, to my brother? I get these calls all the time, to whoever, my colleague. I'm like, do your own grief work first.
Hmm.
I mean, don't wait. So
Transference
keep
is the
keep
worst
keep
mistake we
keep
make.
showing up, of course. Don't wait for 6 months while you go through therapy to, but do your own work. Figure out how to get comfortable with your own grief.
Yeah,
Because the more we hang on to those false beliefs, then we're going to project that onto the griever unintentionally, but we will project it onto the griever.
we have a tendency to compare instead of relate.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
when we compare, we're taking on the
Yeah.
pain,
Yeah.
and making it about us at that point.
Yeah. Which is
And that's,
exactly what we don't want to do.
and as therapists, we know that's called transference. We
Yeah.
transfer the energy onto us and it becomes our pain now, and they're fixing us.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry I made you cry. I'm so sorry. They do, the
Hmm.
griever will do that if we take that on. It's very serious to make sure you heard what she just said,
Yeah.
because grief is something you go through from the moment you're born. I know a lot of you have heard me say we grieve the minute we're born. Coming out
Yeah.
of the womb, we start
Hmm.
crying. Mom takes the bee away, the bottle away. We cry. Our diaper gets taken away. We have to sit on the toilet. We cry. We grieve. Grief is part of the landscape of our lives.
Yeah.
And so when people come to me and say, I don't know how to do this, I tell them that's okay
Yeah.
today, but know that you've done it.
Yeah.
It's not foreign. And I
Yeah.
think that's the scariest part about grief, is that we see it as a foreign entity.
Yeah.
And and I want you to touch on this because I know you've studied this, I have not, but other cultures understand grief in a completely different way.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that they walk through it with grace and understanding. And do they grieve? Yes, they grieve. But when I say grace, I'm talking about the supporters. They
Yeah.
know how to help them. I mean, I wasn't in any grace when I was myself grieving.
No,
Forget it.
no.
Don't ask me to be in grace. But the supporters around me needed to have that grace. And they also needed to carry that grace card for me. I
Yeah.
needed them to pull that grace card out, because I might look at them and say, go to hell, or get out of my face, or leave me alone, or stop calling me, or I don't want any more food. I want to be left alone. Or why aren't you coming over? I find, especially with suicide, people
Yeah.
don't show up, and they don't show up because it's their worst nightmare.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
terrifies them.
Yeah.
That's that transferring that energy onto them.
Yeah.
And so you're very alone in grief. Grief is singular.
It,
And
it
so,
is, it's not inherently singular. I mean, to your point, it's not inherently singular. Actually, grief is communal because for most of human existence, we lived communally,
but
right?
we don't now.
But
It's
we don't
easy.
now, and especially in the West. So, to your point about different cultures, this
Mhm.
is where I sort of come back when I think about, even probably 250 years ago in this country, we did better than now. So when we think of the rise of the industrial age, the rise of moving to cities where people don't live together anymore, where we are, we can fix it with a machine. We can go to space. And by the way, I'm not criticizing anything. I'm glad there's advancement. It's in we have indoor plumbing, and I'm glad that we have air conditioning, and I'm glad that surgeons and radiologists and, oncologists knew how to treat my cancer. So I am not, just want to put that caveat out there. I'm not bashing modernity. And the way we have told the story, of literally paving over nature. We move apart from each other. We built our economy such that we have to be working 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year, maybe 51 weeks a year if we get paid time off, um, means that we've lost touch with that inner knowing, both on how we tend to our own grief, but also how do we tend to each other, right? And so I think, to your point, what I do, I walk alongside grievers. That's how I think about it when I work with grievers individually. And really what I'm helping us do is tap into that inner human knowing of what we need. What happens is we have a need come up. I need to feel seen. I need to be able to cry. I need to be hugged. But I live alone and I don't want to bother anybody, and everybody's working. And like the nature of how we live is in contrast to this primal organic way of knowing that we need to grieve. And so that's part of what I talk about is we have to learn how to figure out what our needs are and then go about honoring them, which is a challenge. Other cultures have long mourning periods. When we think about in the Jewish tradition around sitting Shiva, but this is true of lots of cultures around the world and even culture communities here in the US or in the West. But again, I think we can't not link our discomfort with grief to the way we've set up our society, the way we've set up our culture. It's sort of anathema to that, right? There's the messy, long, emotional, physical labor of showing up without this energy of fixing, which we are a culture of there is a solution for everything, right?
Mhm.
So we just need somebody to come sit in the suck with us, as a podcast guest once said. I really love that expression, sit in the suck with us. But we live in a machinery that doesn't know how to do that. How would I even get off the wheel? You know?
Well, that's like the wheel of the stages of grief.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
reason I say grief is singular is this simple
yeah, yeah.
statement. No one grieves the same.
Yes, grief is unique. Yes,
So
thank you.
I lose my mother, my sister loses her mother, same mother,
Yeah,
different grief.
because you had different
Still grief,
relationships. Yeah,
yes. So in that way, grief is singular.
yes,
You lose a daughter, your husband will grieve it different than you will. Same
yes,
grief, it's grief. Grief is
yeah,
grief, but it will feel differently. It will feel singular. It
yes.
will feel personal to you. And it's important to note that because I see husbands and wives all the time
Me
say
too.
things, say things like, well, he's not even grieving.
Yeah.
And I'm suffering and he doesn't even want to talk about it. And yes, it's meeting him where he is.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean he's not grieving, but he's going to grieve differently.
Well, we
And
have
so,
different grief styles too. Different people have different grief styles, right? There's the
absolutely.
emotional, there's the rational or practical griever. And to your point, husband and wife could lose that child. They had different expectations. They had different relationships with the child. They had different dreams about the future and their role with the child. They had different backstories to their life. What other losses did they face? So even when we grieve the same loss, for instance, my daughter and I grieved my husband very differently, still to this day do, both in our outward expression and in our inward processing. And so, yes, I think I misunderstood that. I agree that it's singular in that it's unique. And I would add, Susan, we will grieve a next loss different than this loss. So, how
Yes.
you grieve, like 3 years after my husband died, I was by the bedside of my friend Joe when he took his last breath, right? So my loss and my grief for Joe was very different. How I expressed it outwardly, but also how I experienced it internally for lots of different reasons. He was my friend, he was not my husband. But it also brought up the loss that I had just experienced with my husband, right? So I think that's important to know. I want to name those, Susan, because I think I start my book out practically. The first sentence is practically every grief journey is unique. So I definitely believe in this. And I think it's important for us to understand back to that idea of community, that while every grief is unique, there are some common themes and experiences that are going to be really important for us to know so that we can show up for ourselves and one another with that holding space and bearing witness and that knowledge. We can remember you're not going to feel in your early grief how I felt in my early grief specifically, but I'm going to remember that the brain fog was high, that I was in shock, which shock, by the way, is a great thing that our body does for us. It helps us from processing too much too fast. So knowing that that person's grieving a little differently, but they're probably in that era or that season of brain fog, well, now I might be able to show up and help them set things on auto renewal or manage their bills for them or do things that they're not going to be able to do because grief brain is real. So it's important the both and there, which I talk about a lot in my work, the both and is every grief journey is unique. And it's important to recognize that we've learned a lot about how we show up for ourselves and others. And to know that is going to be really helpful. Even if we're not going to go back to living on a commune, which is not what I'm necessarily advocating, we're going to be able to be more equipped to show up for our colleagues, for our neighbors, for our friends, for our family. Yeah.
for ourselves.
For ourselves too, for sure. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I know every grief I've gone through, which all of you know my story. So,
Yeah.
but it was like I felt like there were these little pebbles in this big, huge field, and every rock that, came in, grief that came in, all those pebbles started breaking open.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
you you referred to that, and I felt like I was being drowned underneath all these
Yeah.
pebbles, and I couldn't
Yeah.
figure it out. Like, why am I reacting as though everything is shattered? For years and years and years in this one particular grief, it's because it all was coming forward.
Yeah.
That, the reminder, in I can, share a suicide, that reminder one more time,
Yeah.
that here it comes again, that
Yeah.
particular style of grieving. Because there are different, depending upon different, we have different stages, different ways of grieving: the
Yeah.
anticipatory grief, the sudden loss, the
Ambiguous grief.
yes, and
Ambiguous. Yeah.
yes, there are so many different ways that we lose people, or it
Lose
could be
dreams, lose
yes.
relationships. We have infertility. Yeah, we are denied
Oh, I went through that one too.
a sports
Mhm.
career. You know, we have a catastrophic injury and now our whole dream about being an Olympic athlete is gone, right? We have the sources of our grief come from every place you can imagine. And yet, a lot of the things that we experience in our grief are the same. It's still
Yes.
impacting our emotional and physical, cognitive, spiritual, relational well being. So, yes, we can understand that. And, another thing when you were saying about the pebbles, Susan reminded me, is sometimes those pebbles crack open because this new loss is very much shining a light on that old loss. And it's all normal. It's all, of course, that does. How could it be any other way? Also, what I've witnessed in my work with people too is that um, we like to think we can just pack grief away if I just don't talk about it and I don't pay attention to it. But grief will find you.
Mm.
Grief will find you. It'll find you in your body, in your illness. It'll find you in your cognition and your spiritual. And it'll find you when this loss happens and you think, well, this isn't even that big of a deal, but I'm drowning in it. It might be because there's this whole grief back here. Sorry, I'm a hand talker. There's this whole grief back here that hasn't been tended to. So then
Mhm.
we do our best to begin to unpack and tend to that grief. We don't judge ourselves. We don't criticize ourselves. We remind ourselves, oh, yep, I live in a grief illiterate
Mhm.
world. No one showed me how to do this. So I'm learning and I'm doing the best I can. I'm bringing this deep self compassion to my practice. Yeah.
Exactly. Can you talk about anger in grief?
Yeah. I mean, this is, I think, one of the most misunderstood emotions in grief. We think about sadness, we think about longing, we think about regret and shame and guilt and sorrow, right? But anger is a sign of injustice. Something unjust happened, right? But for many of us, I'll speak for myself, I grew up in a family where sometimes people were explosively angry. So I have a really high sensitivity to it. So I try not to get angry, right? Or whatever is your experience. And also in this culture of, especially for women, but this is true for all of us, where we want to get along and be polite. And, we think of anger as being outside of the bounds of our civil discourse, right?
Mhm.
But anger is an emotion. And like every emotion, it needs to move. Emotion. Emotions need to be in movement. And one of the things I see is that people stuff down their anger and it sort of poisons them in that way and gets them feeling stuck. Again, anger is about an injustice that happened. So we need to, and it's not a one and done. We need to swear at the sky. We need to write it out in our journal. We need to punch a pillow if we have to, or go to a boxing ring and punch a boxing bag. We need to find our ways to speak to this thing that happened to us. One of the things that I relate anger to is just a general way of seeing grief is these losses happen to us. We did not choose them. Now, we can even grieve losses we choose. If you choose to leave the marriage, you can still grieve. But for the most part, losses happen to us. You know, someone we love died and we didn't want it to happen, right? We were infertile or whatever. And it robs us of our sense of agency. I don't have any agency. The world is chaotic. We have this existential crisis. What the heck? The world is upside down. And anger is actually a way we can reclaim our agency, really tending to all of our emotions, but especially anger, since it's usually we try to, sweep it under the rug, is a way to reclaim our agency. This is what my body is telling me. I need to express it. It needs to come in and out. And so that's I went on and on, but I think
No,
about
no.
that.
And can you also touch on that with the way that a lot of my clients, and
Yeah.
I know a lot, especially mothers, they feel guilt when
Yeah.
they feel angry. They feel
Yeah.
guilt that
Yeah.
they're angry at their child for making the choice they did, or being where
Yeah.
they were, or
Yeah.
marrying the wrong person, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
That guilt's coming up because they're angry about it. And that, would you
Yeah.
touch
Yeah.
on
I
that?
think so. I think they get conflated and confused sometimes. One of the things I talk about often, and I did mention it in my book, is we have this bad habit in our culture of assigning value to emotions. We talk about good emotions and bad emotions. In my estimation, emotions are information. I mean, emotions are a neural impulse that actually happens before we even have consciousness about it. And then we tell a story on top of it. And that's where we end up leading to things like
Yes.
guilt and rage and anger. It's the stories we tell, right? So, first and foremost, I want to say emotions aren't good or bad, they're information. So, instead of feeling bad for feeling a kind of way, let's notice that we're doing that, which all of us do. Oops, I'm having a judgment. I'm having feelings about my feelings, right? That happens to us a lot. And then we can remind ourselves, actually, feelings are information. So let me get curious instead. Why am I feeling that way? Where am I feeling it in my body? What is the story I'm telling? Is that actually story true? Right? Oftentimes we do this guilt because we then presume we're living in fantasy land because we assume if we had made a different choice or we told our child to do a different thing, then this series of events would have happened, right? We don't know that. We don't know that, right? So guilt, for instance, I've heard folks say guilt is useful once. Guilt is useful the first time. So you have this thing come up, if it's not because of story and there's nothing you could have done about it. But let's say there was something you did and you left the keys there or you did the thing. You let that be information. It's then how will I act differently in the future so that I know I don't repeat this pattern? Guilt is useful once, then you're done. Shame, never useful. I just said no emotions are good or bad, but I will say shame, though it's very common, is not a productive emotion. It's actually a very sticky cycle because it has a lot of story to it that is very false, which is not that a bad thing happened or I did a bad thing, but that I am bad. And we have no forward movement from there. If our
Right.
core assumption is I am bad, then
Here we are.
there's no
There it
movement
is.
forward. Yeah.
I
So
have
that's
an
what,
acronym for
yeah.
shame. Should
Okay.
have already mastered everything.
Yes, I love that. And we
Mhm.
don't. Again, but we live in a culture, well, now with AI, that thinks we should be able to know how to do everything expertly, including,
Mhm.
by the way, know how to grieve. I fell victim to this myself. My boss called me back to work 2 weeks after my husband died. I was the clinical director of a nonprofit. I was seeing clients. I should know how to grieve. I'm an
Mhm.
expert. I've never grieved this loss before. I've never been there before. You've never grieved that specific loss. So how could you know? So we have to separate this emotions that we're feeling and allow them to move through us because emotions are actually very temporary. They're very short-lived. I think 15 seconds, I heard a neuroscientist say. From the stories we tell that make emotions sometimes get stuck. So sometimes the stories we're telling, I'm bad, I'm a bad mother, I did a bad thing, right? So we want to get curious about the stories that we're telling. Um, and just be curious. And maybe that's all we can do is be curious. We know it's maybe not true, but we still feel it. And then we just allow ourselves to feel it for a while. And then maybe in a week or a month, we invite ourselves to revisit that and see if we can separate ourselves a little bit from the story that we've constructed, because stories aren't neutral. They have an impact on our lives. And so it's really up to each of us to ask ourselves, is this story serving me or not? And if the answer is it's not, then what's a different story that allows me to move forward with, that allows me to forgive myself, that allows me to give myself permission to be angry, whatever that is. But it's sort of noticing the story that we've attached to our emotion is a lot of the work I do for myself in my own grief, because that's how we end up shitting all over ourselves. But also the work I do when I work with others, yeah, is to like recognize that story.
So and thank you for that.
Yeah,
How do you feel about, grief is what's a game changer, but
yeah,
bringing more clarity to our journey,
yeah.
more
I
more growth, more, and I don't want to say awe, because I don't think that's a good
well,
word, but it could. I
yeah,
mean, it actually is a good word.
yeah,
How does that occur?
yeah,
And where do you see that in the stage of grief of, does it happen in the beginning? Does it happen in the
yeah,
middle? Does it happen
yeah,
anywhere in between?
yeah. I love this question. I talked about this in the early in my specific work around grief, but it's just grown in my understanding over time. Um, I want to say before I say the answer, I want to come back to that cultural thing, which is we never have to make meaning of the loss. Does never have to be a reason about the loss. So keep that in your hat as I say this. And what I've recognized for the people who have the support and the courage and the bravery to turn towards their loss, to be a companion to their sorrow, build a capacity for awe and wonder and joy and purpose in ways that you might not have had access to if this loss had not happened. Again, let me make clear, I would throw all my clarity away if Eric could come back. So this is not an either or, but this is it's possible. It's open to us. I will say, having had the loss itself doesn't necessarily make you more compassionate, more open to awe and wonder, more appreciative every day. It takes work because I think we all know people in our lives who've experienced a lot of loss and they've shut it down, they've drank it away, they've drugged it away, they've hid it away, and they're more I don't know, closed in. I'm doing this, I'm feeling this kind of, they're more closed in. So I think our capacity to be in reverence of the everyday, to have a kind of increased capacity for gratitude and wonder and awe. I mean, I've been taking beauty walks for 8 or 10 years now, and I like delight in the same flowers that I walk by every day for all these years. And I don't think I ever would have noticed the flowers in my neighborhood before, as an example, right? So, yes, I think when we've crossed through a threshold, it does not happen in the beginning. And again, I use these terms loosely because there aren't phases. But when I say the beginning, I mean, sometimes early grief is 6 months, you know, depends on what your loss is or what you're going through. But many of us are experiencing grief brain for at least a year at some level or more. So, you know, I think when we start to thaw out from the shock, when we start to have the big feelings, then when we maybe have a day where we had a good hour or we had a good 5 minutes, and then maybe we have weeks when we found some ease, or maybe we laughed for the first time. I still can remember when I laughed for the first time after Eric died. And then we move forward because we're tending to our grief. We're not shutting it down. We're not denying it. We're talking about our person. We're letting ourselves cry. We're letting ourselves be angry. We're moving our bodies. We're nurturing our sleep, whatever we're doing. Then we can bring intention to, wow, I appreciate just the sunshine on my face because I have the energy to get out of the house now and I didn't. right? Or I love to be in nature, or and just the reverence and the beauty of it. And maybe we find our person there, right? In the scope of things. So I think I've really never known a friend or client who's really done the work, and I hate that expression, I just don't have a better expression, but who've really turned towards their loss, that hasn't found in some way a greater capacity for those things, which is why I say with hesitancy, I think grief can be a gift. It can be a gift for how we live our life, not a gift because, again, don't want it to happen. I'd take Eric back over everything I've had between then and now. But just like when you see people, go through cancer and then they come out the other side and they say, what was I even doing worrying about my job and finance? I need to love my family and spend time with my kids. And, they kind of have an epiphany about what actually matters in life. How do I want to spend my time? What do I value? How are my actions and my values lining up or not? Any kind of catastrophic loss, which could include a death of someone you loved or maybe an illness, is a door to asking ourselves that question. But we have to be willing to walk through that door,
Mhm.
and ask ourselves those questions. How am I living? And am I living in alignment with my values? And that comes further on down the road at an unspecified time in our grief. I can't say, but definitely not in early grief. In early grief, our only job and other people's job for us is to help us tend to our emotional, cognitive, physical, relational, spiritual well-being. That's our only job, just to tend to it. Um, Somewhere down the road, then we might have the opportunity to ask ourselves, you know, how might what might I appreciate in the world, or what did this loss invite me to notice about how I'm spending my life, you know? And that happens. And then we have it in waves, and then we get used to some normalcy and some complacency. And then, like what happened to me a few years ago, then I had a family member who was suicidal, and I thought I was going to lose them. And then I got cancer and went through my own cancer treatment. And then that right-sized again this door that I had to walk through again. How am I spending my time? What do I value? Who are the people that are in my life? What matters to me? How am I appreciating nature, awe, wonder? Right. So it's unfortunate, but for most of us, it takes some big wake up call for us to ask ourselves those questions, right?
Or many.
Or many, yeah, many wake up calls. And we keep asking them. That's the practice of life, as far as I can tell.
Seems to be.
Yeah.
And life is about the ebb and flow.
Yeah. Yeah.
100%,
That's not an
and
exception. It's not an exception to our story. Life
right.
is an ebb and flow. I think we just try to pretend like it's an exception or that's where we failed somehow, but that's life. Yeah.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm. And loss,
And
life and
loss.
loss.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I want to make sure people have time to ask you
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah.
And
Of
I see
course.
there's like 12 things in the chat. So I'm going to go to the chat.
Okay.
Is there anything you'd like to sum up with what you've been saying here? I mean,
I
it's
I
been
don't think
amazing.
so. Oh, well, I appreciate that. No, I don't think so. I want to make sure we have space for other people. And as you can tell, I could go on and on about this topic because I love it so much, but I'd rather make space for
I'm right
others.
there with you. I remember when I lost my second brother died. And somebody said to me a couple things. One person said to me, I find it so interesting that you were the last person to talk to them both. Yeah. And I remember that hitting me. And my brothers, were in addiction. And so I was trying
Yeah.
to help them
Yeah.
and, fix the situation. I was
I know.
young.
Yeah.
And I can remember that hitting me. Until this day, I hear those words,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I had someone else when my mother also died by suicide. And I had someone else say to me, it was a family member actually, that I murdered her because I didn't take care of her enough to keep her here. And, these are the kind of statements people hear.
Yeah.
Why didn't you get her away from that
Yeah.
person? Or why didn't you take
Yeah.
better care of your body? Or,
Yeah.
these kinds of comments that come out of people.
Again,
Some
because
of them are just,
they're trying, this horrible thing happened that makes no sense. I'm going to try to make sense of it. So I'm going to put the responsibility on somebody, because if I can
yes,
believe that if you did something, then this outcome wouldn't have happened, then I
I
can
won't
rest.
feel so bad.
Then I can rest at night. I'm really sorry
Yeah.
those words were said to you, Susan. And that really breaks
Oh,
my heart. And it's such a reminder to all of us that our words matter. Our
they do.
words matter, which is, again, my grief literacy mission isn't just to help grievers, but it's also to create a more grief literate support community, so that we don't end up saying these harmful words that we remember 10, 20, 30, 40 years later. We don't want to be remembering those things. We want to remember the kind gestures. And yeah,
Exactly. And for all of you that are in the sanctuary, we all support each other.
yeah,
And we're writing notes to each other and little, letters to each other on the sanctuary. And keep in mind everything you learned today,
yeah,
because even though you're also in a grief process, we do forget that we have to be cognizant of the words we speak.
yes, yeah,
And clearly I'm a believer that they're with us
yes,
always.
yeah,
I mean, in fact, when I got off the phone with Lisa, I ended up
yeah.
on the phone with her again, and I think I did read, it wasn't Joe, it was Eric,
It was
right?
Eric. It was my husband. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And that is not a mechanism to avoid grief or get out of grief or not feel your
yeah,
grief. It's just a little piece of the healing
yeah,
process, a
yeah,
little piece.
yeah,
If you have one moment of relief in that reading where
yeah.
you feel, like your loved one is there, if it's even lasts a moment, it is powerful in the grieving process.
I have to say, Susan, I want to make sure we have time for people's questions, but ever since our conversation that we had last year, I guess it was, um, I have really renewed my practice to talking to Eric daily, and it has really made a big difference in my life. I really feel his presence. Oh, it's going to make me cry right now. I just really feel his presence. I feel more grounded. I feel more connected, which is really important, because as time goes on, kind of the day-to-day memories can fade. And so just that practice of communing with our people
Yeah,
is really important. So I just want to thank you for that. And also just invite people, if you're doing that already and you're thinking, oh, I shouldn't do that, well, be a should detective and remember that if that's what helps you, then you go right about doing that. Yeah.
that's right. Whatever helps.
Yeah.
All right. Lisa's amazing. So happy
Oh,
she's joining us.
thanks.
And they love your podcast
Thank you.
and they've seen your TEDx. Let's see.
You might notice I looked a lot different. So that was my pre-cancer hair.
Yeah, you're beautiful.
Oh,
We were taught that talking about feelings and showing emotions was, oh, we were taught that
yeah.
we weren't supposed to show. Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, it's very accurate.
Yeah.
Um, we can't fix grief. I think you guys got that today.
Yeah.
Um, we lose touch with our personal communities.
Yeah.
Did
We didn't
you
touch
want to
on,
touch on that?
yeah, I don't know if this is what Claudine meant, but one of the things that is, I think I call it, I'm allowed to swear in here. I think I call that chapter the sneakiest secondary losses, the sneakiest bitches of them all. And that secondary loss is often those losses. Sometimes it's the home we lived in because we have to sell it, for instance. But oftentimes, many of us lose friendships or
Yeah,
relationships with family members because they can't handle their grief, they can't handle our grief. They and so we have these cascading secondary losses, and sometimes our personal communities, or that person was the person that tethered us to that community. And now that they're not here, you know, like Eric's family all disappeared on us. They just
yeah,
decided they couldn't be with us anymore. Right. So those losing touch with personal communities is another form of our loss that we have to tend to.
can I talk to you briefly? Just, I
Yeah.
want you to touch on one more thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there are people, let's say it's a loss that their child won't ever speak to them again,
Yeah.
or a future I'm going to be leaving this planet and it's coming and I know it's coming.
Yeah.
But I want to just touch on that feeling of loss, the intensity of that, because there's a few people I know that are on here who
Yeah.
haven't had a relationship with their children, or their children has pushed them
Yeah.
out for
Yeah.
whatever reasons,
Yeah.
is insignificant to me in that this part of the conversation. But can you touch on
Yeah.
that kind of grief?
Yeah. So that's what we call ambiguous grief. That was a term coined by Pauline Boss. It can happen when someone is physically present but psychologically distant, meaning like Alzheimer's or dementia, or they can be physically distant but very much present in our hearts. And when we have people who are maybe our grown children who aren't speaking to us, or a family member, we know they're still alive. And the ambiguity comes from there isn't the I mean, there is the myth of closure no matter what, even if somebody's dead. I don't believe in closure in that way. But ambiguous losses are more complicated. I would say they're sort of more inherently complicated to grieve because there's not that finality. There's always that could or would, or this isn't, it's also sort of out of turn, meaning this isn't what you expected. When we talk about out of order losses, we talk about when your young child dies, for instance, or maybe even your young husband. But also, we assume that we're going to be in relationship with our family members until one of us sort of goes. And when there's a fracture or a fissure, for, I guess you said, for whatever reason, addiction, whatever the reason, it's really ambiguous. And so we're kind of having to work and tend to our grief in a way that feels and looks a little different. I can't get into the details here, but I think it's important to not acknowledge it as grief, name it as grief, give yourself permission to grieve, think about a ritual practice that you can do that might help you tend to or honor the feelings that you have about it. Because remember, we don't want to hold them in. And then, like grief of a death loss, though I'm acknowledging it's much more complicated, we have to at some point decide to turn our gaze towards how are we going to live our life? Remember, we just talked
Mm.
before about, we get through this place and then we think, how do I want to live in alignment with my values? How do I want to spend my time? What is the meaning and purpose I'm finding in life, not in the loss? And the same is true in a way for people who are experiencing some ambiguous griefs, including, by the way, you have a family member with dementia, right? They're there, but they're not there. And you're grieving the version of them that you were. And the kind of, now you were a child to them, but now maybe you're acting as a parent to them. And we're grieving the fact that we don't get to be the child anymore. There's a lot of ambiguity in that too. And
Yeah.
boy, we do not like ambiguity as humans. We like a story that's neat because
Clean
it's
and
because it's
unmessy.
because not just because it's our culture. I will say that actually comes from our neurophysiologically. A simple straight story that has answers helps us keep ourselves safe.
Yes. And I,
Yeah.
I think I remember, I remember my mother saying, when she lost both her sons, um, this statement that I found to be, well, very, not only painful, but recognizing that when there's life, there's hope.
Yeah. Yes.
So when my brothers were using and not speaking to her, or coming back and talking to her on and off, and they were getting sober and then not, and clean and
Yes.
not, she kept saying, when there's life, there's hope. And when they died,
Yeah.
she had to face that, the hope for them to come back and be
Yeah.
with her again and be in her life was no
Yeah.
longer
Yeah. Yeah.
in the physical realm.
Yeah.
And so, that, recognizing that we have that complication also.
That's why it's, and I said it's the ambiguous losses are more complicated because we are kind of living one foot in both worlds. And
Yes.
so when I say for those who maybe have children who are not speaking with them, which is acknowledge the catastrophe of that grief and give that yourself permission to grieve. And when I say figure out how to, in some ways, turn towards how do I want to live my life, my day-to-day life, how do I want to find purpose, recognizing that that's maybe going to straddle back and forth between glimmers of hope and then maybe disappointment, and then I have to sort of reorient myself to how I'm going to live my life. So I don't say that in a necessarily that you have to, you're not going to stop having feelings or some level of hope. That's probably not realistic. I think what we might hope for somebody who's experiencing ambiguous grief is to be able to maybe have more presence to their present life than being stuck in the hope, but we're going to probably navigate between the two and just to
And
honor
shame,
and the
shame
shame. Yeah.
comes up. Everyone's thinking I'm a bad parent,
Yeah.
or I didn't do my job. My daughter doesn't talk to me, or my son doesn't
Yeah.
talk to me.
Yeah.
I haven't been through that experience, but I have a lot of people who have,
Yes.
and there's a lot of shame. The same kind of shame I went through in my experience with my infertility. My body let me down, it
Yeah.
caused me great harm. And then also with suicide,
Yeah.
shame. I felt
Yeah.
shame. And I recognize now today, it wasn't necessarily other people thinking what's wrong with my family. It was me.
Yeah.
And when that hit me, that's when I was able to heal that thinking process. So I
Yes.
was saying, they're thinking what's wrong with my family, that everyone's killing themselves and so on and so forth. And then I went, oh my God, that's me
That's
thinking
my,
that.
yeah. Yeah.
And now I know that. Now I can heal that. And there's the shame base. Because
Yes.
when you are solid in your knowing of that, no one else can place shame on you. They can try
Exactly.
all they want, but you're solid in
Exactly.
where you come from in that,
We are our most powerful cheerleaders and we are our most harsh critics.
yes.
So we have to interrogate, again, I come back to this like a broken record. We have to interrogate the stories that we're telling ourselves because that story is either closing us off or opening us up. It's making us feel isolated or it's making us feel a part of the human community, right?
Mm.
And so I'm not saying other people can't contribute, by the way, because we have people in our lives, all of us have them, who pile on with the critical things. So there are narrators or there are critics out there. But to your point, if we know to be true that that's not true, that we don't hold responsibility for somebody else's behavior, right? Then they can say it all they want.
And it doesn't penetrate.
It's
That's
not,
true.
then you can see, you've gotten there when you can be like, oh, that's a you problem. That's what I like to
Hmm.
say. When somebody's trying to put their stuff on me, I'm
Hmm.
like, oh, that's a you,
Because you've resolved it
because I've resolved it.
internally.
Not that I've done it perfectly because I haven't resolved. I mean, I'm a work in
No,
progress
we
too,
never do
because
it
we all are.
perfect.
But then you can recognize that's not for me. That's for them. That's
Yeah,
for them to work on. Yeah. And
right.
that's pretty freeing when we can do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Someone mentioned that they lost their grandchildren in the process of losing their daughter
Yeah.
in a very horrific way because now they don't get to be with their grandchildren
Yes.
and they're being held back from them. I'm imagining that's what
Yeah.
you're trying to get
Yeah.
across, Elena.
Yeah.
And the pain of now having that loss on top
These
of
are
it.
these secondary losses, these cascading losses. We also think about that as being, there's a lot of terms. I'm not trying to throw all the whatever jargony terms at you, but just to understand why, Helena, you might be feeling the intensity of this is not only is it these secondary losses, what you're describing is sort of concurrent or compounding losses. So boom, this loss happened. I barely got on my feet. And then this loss happened, which is the no contact with the grandchildren. So think about trying to grieve one loss. You're trying to grieve, in a way, what I hear you saying, four losses. So all that means is so much more grace for yourself, so much more patience, so much more tending to your physical and cognitive and emotional and relationship and spiritual well-being. Like the more complicated your loss, the more compounding losses we have or secondary losses we have, the more grace, the more support, the more tending to ourselves we have to do, or we're invited to do. We don't have to do anything, but I invite you to do. Yeah.
We sound so similar when we
I
talk.
know. I
It
know.
blows my mind, the things like the stories we tell ourselves. You
Yeah.
people have heard me say that so
I
many.
know.
It's
Well,
just
that's
so
like my
interesting.
poem, you know what I mean? Like I'm a
Yeah.
broken record. I'm a broken record with the story stuff. Yeah.
Lisa, I am so mesmerized by everything you shared
Oh,
and your
thank you.
knowledge base and your expertise. And I'm so grateful to you for coming on and helping the community that I love
Yeah.
and care so much about. I can't thank you enough. And
Oh,
we're gonna be recording this and we'll send you the recording. Feel free
yes.
to put it wherever you need to put it.
Yeah.
We appreciate every moment you've given us. And, everybody, I know you're all saying thank you,
Yeah.
Lisa. And it's just amazing what you've offered tonight. The well of knowledge you carry is just, I can't even, I can't
Oh,
even tap into it. And
thank you, Susan. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Now I'm going to be doing a closing grief meditation. If you'd like to stay, Lisa, we'd love to
Yes,
have
I'd love
you.
to.
And it's
Yeah.
late where you are. And then we're going to sign off. So let
Yeah.
me get there. Got it. I have it written out. Okay. All right, everyone, close your eyes and take 3 deep, calming breaths. Allow yourself to be in a space of calm and peace. Everything in this moment you are safe in. This moment, this space, this time, you are among friends. Tonight, you are stepping into a sacred space, held tenderly by spirit. You are surrounded by love and embraced by those you have lost. This is more than a meditation. It's a journey through your grief, carried by your own heart, through the unseen arms of spirit, into deep, lifelong connection. This evening, we will walk together from sorrow into solace, from loss into reunion, from asking into knowing. Take all the time you need. Let your body soften and open your soul. Find your most comfortable position. Allow your hands to rest on your heart or by your side or in your lap. Keeping your eyes closed, take a deep breath in and hold it for just a moment. And as you exhale, releasing your shoulders, your jaw, your neck. Where in your body do you feel your pain? Find that space and release it. Again, breathe slowly in, slowly hold, and exhale, letting your body melt like butter into this moment of peace. One more breath. Inhale love, exhale tension and fear. Feel your heart beating. Anchor in this moment. You are here. You are safe. You are deeply loved. Now in your inner vision, you see a gentle staircase made of soft, glowing stone. It descends downward, quietly, steadily, leading you toward a peaceful inner space. With each step I count, you will sink deeper into calm, moving gently through the sorrow until your heart finds stillness. 20. Step down, breathe, soften. 19. Sinking deeper and deeper down. Emptiness becomes space. 18. Relax your shoulders. Spine lifts slightly. 17. Breath floats in. Breath floats out. 16. Your heart unclenches. 15. Halfway there now. 14. Your mind grows lighter. You have nowhere to be and nothing to do. 13. Emotions find rest. 12. Eyes soft behind closed lids. 11. All noise dissipates, even the noise in your head. 10. Guided deeper in. 9. Feeling more at ease. 8. Spirit draws near. 7. Anchored. 6. Floated, carried, held. 5. All is still. 4. Gentle peace rising. 3. Presence expanding. 2. Deepening into calm. 1. Arriving in your inner sacred space. In this silent space, feel yourself seated in a soft circle of light. The air is calm and kind. The ground beneath you sustains you. Spirit surrounds you like a warm hug. Bring your attention to your spine and to the sound of my voice. See golden roots extending down through your legs effortlessly, through the floor, and deep into the earth's core. Deep, deep into the earth's core. Feel its strength. The roots have a quiet power beneath you. Now feel a soft, luminous light descending from above. It curls softly around your crown, flows down your body, illuminating every cell with love. You are supported from below and guided from above, anchored in truth, held in spirit. In your inner space, a pathway of rose-hued lights appears. It leads you forward. You follow it into a garden of soft moonlight. The flowers are illuminated. The night air is warm, and gentle music hums, the heartbeat of Spirit's love. And there, right there on your path, you sense a presence. You know without seeing, someone you love. They are here. They walk with you in your grief. And right now, they walk with you in peace. Sense their approach, the warmth of their energy, their sigh, the pull at your heart. You may see them. You may feel them. Maybe it starts as a knowing, an emotion, a memory, suddenly alive. They speak not in words, but in presence. I am here. You feel the release of years or time, the unraveling of pain, the glow of love once again flowing. Feel them step close. Feel the warmth of their hand, either seen or unseen. Feel the soft pressure at your chest, and your heart expands to greet them. You may now speak silently. Ask your questions. Voice your longing. Are you okay? I miss you. Do you know how much I love you? Tell me you're still with me. Let your voice flow. They answer you, not in words, but in presence, an emotion, a memory that blooms. Trust what you feel. Trust what rises. They reveal what heals, maybe forgiveness, maybe gratitude, maybe release, maybe reassurance. Let it come. Feel it stream through you. Soft, light, shimmering through your chest, turning pain into relief. For this moment, turning sorrow into peace. This transformation happens through love and trust. Grief is not erased, it is held. And in that holding, it can breathe. Remain here as long as you need. Speak, receive, heal. Your spirit team gently steps forward now. Your guides, protectors, gatekeepers of love. They stand behind your loved one in spirit. They offer clarity, comfort, encouragement. They say, you've done beautifully. You're not alone. We are here. We hold this space. They're now passing you a soft symbol of healing, a feather, a flower, a light into your awareness. Receive it. Recognize their presence. Honor their gift. Thank them. Hear them whisper, thank you for being here. Thank you for allowing our reunion. Our love remains eternal. Feel the circle of light around you shimmer brighter. The garden warms with their love. In the center of the garden is a small pot of seed. They offer it to you. They say, this grief is not emptiness, it's soil. Plant this seed in it. Let new meaning grow from our love. Visualize placing it in your heart. See it sprouting. Tender shoots of peace, hope, of soul connection. Take in their gift. You never heal by forgetting. You heal by weaving love through your loss. When the timing feels right, your loved ones step back. Your guides step close beside you. Thank them again. Feel their love anchoring in you. Know that grief and love now coexist. Your sorrow carries their love forward. Their presence is your anchor. Follow the rose-hued path now back to the golden rose light where you began. Feel their love walking with you, guiding you, holding you. Now the staircase returns and you ascend. 1, breath quickens. 2, fingers move. 3, senses awakening. 4, peace returns. 5, heart beating. 6, gentle movement. 7, rooted energy still present. 8, warmth in your chest. 9, almost fully present. And 10, eyes open when ready. Take care of you today. Love set.
Thank you.
See you next time. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye.